You sit perfectly still, and that's what drives her mad. Not your words, not your gaze, but the void where a reaction should be and isn't. Like a statue she cannot crack, a tomb she cannot open. She thinks you're calm, but it's not calm. It's contempt disguised as silence. You are not waiting, you are watching. You are not suppressing rage. You are letting her dance around the gallows she built for you barefoot, laughing, unaware it was her own rope you handed back with a bow. She wants to test your limits, but you already burned them in secret. She wants to win you, but you're the prize that rejects its winner. She wants to break you open, but you are not a man. You are resistance incarnate, the mirror that refuses to reflect what she wishes to see. If this whisper already knows you, let it echo. Like the video, leave your shadow in the comments. Subscribe and stay near the silence. She'll scream louder when you say nothing. That's when you'll know it's working. You do not answer. That is the beginning. Not with silence that begs to be understood, but with silence that devours attempts. Her voice hits you like rain against stone, dramatic, pleading, wounded, but your stillness turns it all into weather. There is no reaction, no shift, no twitch of defense or need to be righteous, and that terrifies her, though she does not yet know why. She accuses you of being distant, cold, unmoved, but what she really means is, why can't I reach you? She pokes at the surface, hoping it's soft beneath. She throws old memories like stones, hoping one will strike the hidden pulse in your armor. She waits for the confession, the apology, the moment you need her belief in you. But that moment doesn't come. You are not waiting for her to believe in you. You are not built for her redemption arc. You are the unyielding sculpture carved by your own refusal to need her permission. Once, you used to explain. That was the old sickness, the disease of the justified man, begging to be understood so he wouldn't be left. But that man is dead. You let him die in the quiet moments, where no one applauds, where no woman weeps at your grave. You buried him without ceremony, without a name, and now she speaks to the statue. You do not perform humility. You do not defend your decisions like a lawyer on trial for his own essence. You do not decode your gaze for her. You let her guess. You let her spiral in the gaps your silence opens. You do not resist the accusations. You absorb them into the void and let her rage collapse under the weight of its own echo. She thinks you are doing nothing, but your nothing is a weapon sharper than argument, colder than retreat. Your nothing is not absence, it is presence stripped of apology. She tries to provoke warmth. That's how she'll get in. A memory, a guilt, a wounded look, a soft touch. She wants to summon the old reflex, the one where you crumble just a little, smile to keep peace, open a gate. But the gate rusted shut long ago. She stands before it with a torch and asks why it won't move. She does not know it is a tombstone. She does not know it was welded shut by every time you tried to explain yourself to someone who only wanted to edit you. Your restraint is not emotional repression. It is discipline. It is clarity. You know that the moment you react, you lose the frame. You know that to respond is to acknowledge the rules of her emotional economy, and you are bankrupt by design. You do not play the market of approval. You do not trade in the currency of being right. You let her monologue echo in the marble cathedral of your silence. Let her hear her own voice bouncing off a man she cannot bend. And in that echo, something ancient returns. A myth she buried. A question she fears. What if he doesn't need me? What if his soul is already married to something beyond me? What if I'm not the storm he drowns in, but the weather he watches pass? You become an archetype, not a man, but a monument. And monuments are not loved, they are studied. She starts speaking slower. She watches for the flicker. She lowers her voice, switches from rage to sweetness. Still, you do not move. She retreats, advances, retreats again, and each time you remain still, the stillness of one who already crossed the desert and left his thirst behind. She thought your calm meant weakness. Now it starts to haunt her, because it means she cannot influence you. You become uncanny, not cruel, worse, indifferent to reaction. You are no longer her reflection, and that means she has no power here. There is nothing more painful to a manipulative spirit than encountering a man it cannot animate. She doesn't know how to name you. Not cold, not mean, not angry, just unreachable. And reachability is how she controls. She wants you to flinch, even kindly. She wants you to rise, even righteously. She wants your center to move. But the more she tries, the more it is her center that starts to crack. And that is where the fracture begins, in the stillness of your gaze. She begins to see herself not the adorned version, not the seductive role, but the naked hunger beneath it. The manipulation disguised as need, the chaos packaged as care. She feels it exposed, because the statue does not give warmth it reflects. You are not unfeeling. You are simply done making your soul digestible. You no longer offer yourself in fragments that can be chewed, swallowed, rewritten. You are whole, which means you are indigestible, and that is why you must be rejected, or worshipped, or feared, but never possessed. And slowly, the balance shifts. She begins to orbit, first in frustration, then in fascination. Because the statue she cannot crack becomes the mystery she cannot abandon. In your silence, she feels her own noise. In your composure, she sees her own unraveling. And in your absence of defense, she begins to wonder what must live behind that door she cannot open. You do not reward the shift. You do not respond even to the new softness. You remain exactly as you are, not frozen, but forged. And that is the distinction. She thought she was dancing with a man. Now she's staring at a myth. And myths are not swayed by pleading. They demand transformation or they vanish. She may scream, she may beg, she may cry in the voice of the child who once begged her father to explain why he left. You do not play that father. You are not the wound's nurse. You are the pain she cannot soothe, and in that mirror, she meets the limits of her power. Let her leave, let her threaten, accuse, sob, seduce. The statue does not follow. The statue is not a game. The statue is what remains when the game is finished. And if she returns, it is not because you begged. It is because the silence hollowed her out. Now she starts to ask you questions not about facts, but about meaning. Not because she wants to know your answers, but because she can't stand not knowing if you even have any. But still, you do not answer. You tilt your head slightly, not as gesture, but as eclipse. She sees the edge of something she cannot access. That is when she stops speaking. That is when her eyes shift not to you, but to herself. Because now she sees what you refuse to say. And now she must decide, crack herself open, or retreat forever. You say nothing. You remain a statue. And that is how the myth begins. You did not tie her with it. That's the cruelty. You handed it to her loosely, gently, almost tenderly. The rope was not made of threat or control. It was made of moments, little silences, a quiet nod, a withdrawn hand, the kind of absence that reveals more than 1,000 apologies. You gave her the rope, and she made it a lasso. She swung it with emotions dressed as questions, looped it with sighs, tightened it with tears. But each time she pulled, she found only one thing at the end, her own reflection. Recoiling, she accused you of being distant again. But this time it came with trembling, because it was no longer indifference she sensed in you. It was calculation, not cold in the way a man forgets, but cold in the way a man remembers everything and chooses nothing. You had become an architect of silence, letting her speak long enough to watch the structure collapse. She began to feel exposed, not because you said too much, but because you said nothing at all, and still, she knew what you saw. You let her erupt, let her blame, let her sob with the performance of a wounded saint, and you sat not as victim, not as stone, but as a man who had already buried the need to be cleared. She tried to corner you with guilt, but your stillness turned the room into a stage, and her into the only actor. And every time she shouted, she tightened the rope herself, not knowing the knot was in her throat. She said, "Why don't you fight for us?" And you thought, "Because I am not at war." She said, "Do you even care?" And you thought I cared. Then I saw the game. She said, "Say something." And you thought everything is already being said by what I do not say. She doesn't know why she's unraveling. She only knows that the more she tries to win, the more she loses ground. Her words get sharper, her movements faster, her logic collapses into appeals, her threats dissolve into tears, and still, you do not rise, because you know the one who speaks least in chaos is always the one with the real power. You used to think love meant being understood. Now you understand that clarity ruins the ritual. You do not explain, not because there's nothing to say, but because explanation gives her a way back to control. You know her nature now, not the words she says, but the rhythm of her storms. You see the tantrum not as pain, but as a bid for dominance disguised as vulnerability. And that is why you remain still. Not because you are unmoved, but because you are unbuyable. She collapses into silence eventually, not because you won, but because she no longer knows how to lose. Your refusal to argue means her drama has no script. She tries to provoke, but even your breath won't change. She wants to see if she still matters, and you hand her the rope again by doing nothing, because what breaks her isn't betrayal. It's the mirror of a man she cannot manipulate into proving her worth. You watched it all shift. At first, she wanted to be right. Then she wanted to be pitied. Then she wanted to be forgiven. Then she wanted to be feared. But now she just wants to know if she exists in your eyes. And that's when you know the rope has become unbearable. Because now she is not trying to control you. She is trying to confirm herself through you. And you let her struggle. Because you understand something deeper than pity. Only by confronting the futility of control does she meet her own abyss. This is not revenge. This is freedom shaped like stillness. You no longer defend yourself, and that offends everything in her that relies on chaos to feel alive. She cannot use your reaction as leverage. She cannot pin you down emotionally. You are not cold, you are sovereign. And sovereignty, to one who depends on your reflection, feels like cruelty. Let her break down. Let her weaponize every story. Let her cry about childhood, trauma, fear. You are not invalidating her by staying silent. You are refusing to be used as her proof of transformation. That is not cruelty. That is sacred detachment, because now she stands in front of the abyss you once stared into, the place where no one comes to save you, where your cries only echo back as reminders that you are alone with your choices. You handed her the rope, and she made a knot, and now she stands at its center, looking at you like you built it. But you know the truth. You just didn't interrupt the knotting process, and that's what haunts her. You let her reveal herself completely, and now she sees her own need, her own addiction to power, her own loops of shame. You are no longer the mirror she adjusts. You are the wall she crashes into. You feel no triumph. That is the final layer. Because what you have gained is not dominance, but detachment. You are no longer a participant in her narrative. You do not respond to shame. You do not react to chaos. You no longer seek her softness or her wrath. You watch it all like weather through glass. And yet, here she is again, quieter, gentler, not in defeat but in confusion. You used to chase me, she says. You used to melt. But the you who melted died in the fire she thought was love. He evaporated while trying to be enough. And what remained is you, the one who no longer seeks to be understood, the one who no longer reaches toward rope-shaped hope. She tries to untangle it now, but it's too late. Not because you won't let her, but because you no longer need to. The knots are hers, and she knows it. And that knowledge, more than your silence, more than your gaze, is what breaks her open. Let her leave. Let her come back. You stay still. If she ever returns. Truly, it won't be with games. It won't be with tests. It will be with surrender, not to you, but to reality. And if she doesn't return, she'll remember you forever, not as the one who hurt her, but as the one who did not flinch when she tried to hurt herself through you. This is the paradox of masculine silence. It does not dominate. It mirrors. And the mirror cannot be loved by those who hate their reflection. You let her tighten the rope. You watched. You let her see what happens when the man she's testing simply refuses to be caught. And now she speaks more carefully. She cries less loudly, not because she trusts you, but because she's begun to sense the real danger. You are not angry, and you are not afraid. You are free. And there is nothing more devastating to one who survives on control than a man who walks away from it without closing the door. She still checks the door, still looks over her shoulder to see if the ghost of your old self waits there warm, eager, wounded enough to return. But there is no one waiting. The throne remains untouched. And that is what breaks her. You left the throne empty, not as a gesture, not as a tactic, but as the final refusal. Not only did you reject her games, you rejected your place in them. No man abdicates power as cleanly as the one who understands its illusion. She doesn't understand why it haunts her. The lack of punishment, the lack of begging. She could have handled anger. She could have managed cruelty. But this complete absence of engagement, it turns her own crown to ash. Because a man who walks away without destroying her, without claiming justice, without requiring closure, is a man who held the frame all along, then vanished without needing to be seen. She used to bait you with chaos, and you would rise thinking it made you strong. She used to provoke guilt, and you would confess thinking it made you virtuous. She used to cry, and you would hold her thinking it made you loving. Now she does all these things, and you do not move, because the throne she once thought you sat on no longer exists in your world. You didn't leave it behind for another woman. You didn't replace her with softer comfort. You didn't retreat to safety. You dismantled the game entirely. You saw how the pedestal was always a trap, how the adoration was always bait, how the arguments were always rituals to anchor you inside a loop. And so you shattered the altar, not out of rage, out of clarity. And now you walk among shadows, unknown, unreachable, because you gave up the thing she thought all men crave the need to win her. And in doing so, you became the one man she cannot forget, the one who needed nothing and so revealed everything. This is the throne without a king, a place in her mind where she still sets the table, lights the candles, rehearses what she'd say if she saw you again, but the guest never arrives. The silence stretches, and slowly, she realizes you were never hers. Not really. Not because you were cruel, but because you belonged to no one. And that was the power she mistook for distance. You are no longer pulled by validation. That cord is cut. She could offer devotion now, and still you would not take it. Not because you're bitter, because you no longer build your worth around her recognition. You are not the night at her gates. You are the wind beyond the walls, untouchable, indifferent. And in that indifference, you become legend. Others sense it too, not just her. The world begins to treat you differently. People speak more carefully around you. Women look, but do not reach. Men wonder what secret you hold, because you walk like one who cannot be seduced, not by beauty, not by praise, not by the promise of emotional salvation. You no longer buy what they are selling, because you know the price your silence, your edge, your frame. You have seen the truth love, when made transactional, becomes a form of currency, and most men trade themselves cheaply. You refuse. You are not expensive. You are unavailable. And that unavailability is not scarcity. It is sovereignty. You do not deny love. You simply no longer hunger for it in the form of manipulation disguised as intimacy. She notices this too, the change, the peace that does not ask to be noticed, the calm that does not seek reward. She tries again, cautiously now, with sweetness, nostalgia, memory. Remember when we. But memory is not your leash anymore. You do not dwell in the ruins. You buried the past without flowers. You do not decorate your losses. You transform them into thresholds. Now, her presence no longer stirs you. You can sit beside her and feel nothing pull. Not resentment, not lust, not regret. Only space, vast, endless, unclaimed. The same space that once terrified you when she left now wraps around you like armor. Because it is not loneliness. It is arrival. You are no longer seeking completion. You are the completion she tried to fabricate with her drama. She may say you've changed. She's right. But not in the way she thinks. You did not become colder. You became clearer. You did not become numb. You became immune. You saw the structure behind the seduction, the control behind the compassion, the testing behind the tenderness. And now you cannot unsee it. Not in her. Not in anyone. That's why the throne remains empty, because now you know the king who must prove himself to the queen has already lost. The man who reacts to the test is already beneath her spell, and the one who plays the game of dominance and submission, he has already submitted not to her, but to the illusion that his worth must be verified through her chaos. You refuse now, completely, even when it would be easy to return, even when your body remembers softness, even when your mind longs for the echo of love. You refuse not because you don't feel, but because you do. And what you feel is too vast to pour into a teacup of tests. And so you do nothing, and in doing nothing, you take everything. Her illusions, her leverage, her plans, her pride, all of it dissolves in the presence of your silence, because now she knows there is no performance that will summon you back. You are not a man waiting to be proven wrong. You are not the missing puzzle piece in her self-image. You are the absence that reveals the design. You left the throne not because you were weak, but because you saw it was made of sand, built by hands that sculpted love and control from the same clay. And now you walk among the ruins like a ghost of her own making, unreachable, not cruel, but finished. And still she hopes. Somewhere in the back of her gaze, she imagines the door might open, that you might step back in, that you'll sit again, just once, in the seat she swore you always belonged to. But thrones are for kings who need permission, and you need none. You are not beyond love. You are beyond illusion. And that is what gives you shape now. You are not what she desired, you are what her desire cannot swallow. And that makes you unforgettable. So let her wander, let her circle, let her tell others you vanished unfairly, let her rewrite the history. You do not need to defend the past. You carry no sword, you wear no crown, you leave no trace. You have become the one thing she cannot conquer, a man who disappeared while fully awake and never looked back. There is still a chair by the fire, still a cup on the table. She walks into the room sometimes, dreaming, rehearsing, but the air does not move. The door never creaks. The footsteps she hopes to hear remain inside her own pulse. She looks to the window, not for you, but for the silence. The silence that once answered her with eyes that did not plead, that did not tremble, that simply watched. And sometimes, in her dreams, she sees the throne again, but this time, not empty. This time, it has never existed. Just a shadow in her memory. Just the absence of a man who was never sitting there, only passing through. The throne without a king, the rope without a pull, the echo without a voice. The man who vanished before she ever knew he was real. And still, she listens. But you do not return.